How's it going? My name is Cameron, also known as Venus Theory, and in this video, I'm here to walk you through how I use SynthMaster One to create a modern hybrid trap-style track. SynthMaster One is an epically powerful synthesizer that comes loaded with a bunch of cool effects, wavetables, and wave shaping modes that you can use to create interesting, cutting-edge sounds for your production. So, let's dive in and take a look at how the track was made. Alright, so here we are in Bitwig, and I've got the track open in front of me here, and we can take a look at how I made this track. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of stuff going on. If I open up these folders as well, there are quite a few tracks. There's a lot of just little small detail work things, lots of just little layers and little things that add up to this big, huge sound. So as with most tracks in this style, the drop is kind of the most important leading thing. So that's what I wanted to start with. And I needed to create an A drop and a B drop. That way I had a bit of variation, and then I can add an intro and then just kind of a mid section to break up the two. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first drop here and break down the sounds. So that's pretty much it, just a very modern, aggressive, hybrid trap type of thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at the leads first. So first up, I've got this guy here, and this is just a new sound that I created. I made this using the growl wave table, and then a phase mod here, and that's pretty much all that's going on for the sound, just a little bit of modulation being applied. So if we open the mod matrix, we can see here that mod envelope 1 is targeting the wave index and the sub volume. So in this case, since the sub is doing phase modulation, this is actually just controlling the amount of phase modulation. It's not actually bringing in a sub oscillator. So that creates this sound right here. So from there, it was all about adding processing. If I take away all the effects, the sound sounds like this, which is a bit flat and boring. So it was all about kind of bringing out all that character and detail. So I did that by adding some effects here internally. I've got the distortion going on. I've got an EQ, this is just dipping out some of this extra stuff in here I didn't really want, and just bringing up a bit of low. And the lows here were kind of important in later steps. It just added a bit more character and depth to the sound, otherwise it felt a little bit too thin. After that, I've got a compressor and just squeezing this pretty hard. A chorus going on here, and this is just moving around very, very, very subtly. Actually, not at all. I turned off the mod amount. So that's just providing kind of some interesting metallic textures, because in this sound and style, the metallic vibes are really, really important. So a chorus is actually just a set of delays. So by having very, very low or no modulation at all in your chorus, you can get this kind of really high feedback chorusing effect that creates those metallic textures. After that, I've got a phaser here. This is 12 stages, and this guy has a pretty high feedback, and then just drop the mod amount to pretty slow, and this will just provide a bit of movement over the course of time, so it doesn't sound too repetitive. So that brought the sound up to this. So already it had that more kind of aggressive, modern, interesting feel, so I needed a bit more processing. To do that, I just added some basic effects here. I've got a delay. This is a really, really high feedback, which creates that interesting metallic texture. But because the feedback is so high, I had to add a gate to the end of the sound just to make sure it's not ringing out. So that sounds like this. From there, I just needed to clean it up and add a bit of space. So I added an EQ here, cutting out the low end, boosting some resonance here, and bringing up some of that high end information. And then a relatively long reverb here, about 2 seconds. And then this reverb amount is being automated here over time. This just creates some movement and space and depth, but also gets that reverb tail out of the way when it's not really necessary for the sound. So that brings it to this. So I knew I wanted the lead to go up and down across different octaves, but then it got a bit thin and kind of just needed a little bit of something extra. So I decided to create a new layer. So the second lead layer here is actually a pretty similar thing. It's just a new sound I made myself. This is just a sawtooth. Over here, I've got the BT mid pluck wave. And then that's pretty much all that's going on. There's not too much that's complicated with this. And again, just using a bit of phase mod here in the first oscillator. The filter, and don't think anything else is being modulated really. The sub volume is being modulated here from mod envelope 1. The filter is just up a bit. This is a high pass that just gives it that kind of vocal growly sound. On top of that, just a quick phaser, and mod is 0. So this just creates that kind of metallic phaser effect and really, really high feedback. After that, I did the same thing. I just copied over that delay and just changed it very, very slightly. Very high feedback again to get that metallic feel. So the second lead sounds like this. So this one's a bit further back in the mix, but it just adds this bit of stability. And since the other one is switching octaves here, this one doesn't switch octaves, which just provides a bit kind of a wider tone to this whole lead, especially in the second section. You can hear it here. So it just keeps that metallic, high-pitched, screeching lead thing going without being too overbearing. So, of course, after that, I needed the big, subby, booming 808, which was actually really fun. I really enjoyed designing 808s, and SynthMaster's great for that. So for this patch here, I just initialized and then created a pretty straightforward 808. I just used the effects to really make it different. So what I've got here is a sine, and I set it to bend minus, and I'm adjusting the phase here, which goes through that phase distortion mode. So when I'm using bend plus or minus, this is a great way to add harmonics to a very simple waveform like a sine, which is just a single harmonic being the fundamental. So by doing a little bit of phase distortion with the bend modes, you can get just a bit more growl and a bit more bite, but it also makes it a bit more clear on smaller systems that don't have, you know, really super low subs that it's going to pick up all that really low end information. From there, I added a distortion, pretty aggressive here, mixed in 50-50. This is just a nice way to get that parallel distortion effect. Otherwise, if you had a bunch of distortion and mix it in all the way, you end up losing a lot of low end. So this just helps retain that punch and depth. After that, I have a lo-fi effect here. This just adds a really interesting bit of kind of character and grit to the 808. And then an equalizer, just boosting the subs and boosting a little bit of low end here just because it's a bass, so we need bass. To cap the sound off, I've got a bit of filtering going on here. This is the low pass 12, just cutting it off, and a really aggressive filter drive. Beyond that, there's not too much going on other than the mod matrix using mod envelope 1 to do the pitch glide, which is how we create that boom sound of an 808. So this is the pitch of oscillator 1. It's pretty high, value of about plus 60. And then I just made a really, really, really fast decaying envelope. So that gives me that nice booming, thumping 808. After that, I didn't do all that much to it. I added a pretty aggressive distortion here, mixed in about 25%, and then just EQ'd it to taste. I was just getting rid of some of that super subby information to clear up some headroom in the mix, especially for the mastering stage. Boosting up a bit of low end here and there, boosting up a little bit of about 2K, just brought out some kind of throaty, growly texture to it, and that was really it. So the final sound came out like this. Which is just a really nice, modern, aggressive, deep, mean sounding 808. So next, to kick off the drop, I knew I wanted one of those big, growling, throaty, mean bass sounds. So this is the sound I came up with. So this is actually just a pretty straightforward kind of dubstep inspired growl bass. So if I open this up here, this is just a custom wavetable I have. I'm not sure where I got it from, but you can import your own wavetables. So that's what I did here. And then all I did is change the wave index. So this is being modulated here in the mod matrix from mod envelope 1 again. So this is targeting the wave index and then the sub volume. So the sub again is doing phase distortion, which is just a really, really great way to do those mean aggressive basses. I tuned it up here. So this is 1 octave and 7 semitones. That just creates this big, mean growling bass. So after that, the filter here is a high pass, and this is going up, and then that's really all there was to it. So from there, it was just a matter of adding some effects and stuff to bring out the character. Without all the effects, it sounds like this. Which is all right, but it doesn't really have that, you know, big, mean, larger-than-life growl sound that we need for the introduction of the drop. So for the effects here, I've added a distortion, again, mixing in parallel, boosting fairly aggressively, equalizer, and just getting rid of some kind of resonances here in the mid-range, boosting up the low, and then just ever so slightly lifting up the high to get that kind of raspy tone going. From there, a pretty aggressive compressor, and then a phaser going on here, 12 stage once again. Pretty high feedback, and then just tweaked everything else to taste until I started getting a bit more of that expressive vibe. So I left the mod amount up here, and this is so that each growl is slightly different. You could zero this out to get that kind of high feedback phaser effect, but I find leaving just a bit of modulation to the phaser so it moves subtly over time just creates a bit more interest to the drop because every growl, like I said, is going to be slightly different. So that brought it to this. So now we're starting to get somewhere. It's got that really raspy, mean, throaty, growly thing going on, so it just needed a little bit more processing. So to do that, I've got an EQ here, boosting up some low end, getting rid of some sub information, and cutting out a little bit of mid-range muddiness. I've got a gate here on the end because I'm going to be doing the delay trick again, and that really high feedback delay, like I said, ends up creating some kind of nasty ringing. So after the metallic delay and the EQ are applied, got that, which I thought sounded really, really good. It just needed a bit more movement and character. So I loaded up this. This is Snap Heap, which allows me to do some more complex filter movements and effect chains. So this is just 2 notch filters, and these are tied to LFOs to create a bit more movement and depth to this growl. And since those LFOs aren't tempo synced or anything like that, again, it just creates variation, so every growl is slightly different. So that's really it for the first drop. There's just some noise and stuff underneath here. This just fills out some of the extra space, since these are pretty dry sounds and they're all pretty targeted towards a specific frequency range. So filling out the drop with some noise just really makes it sound huge. So now for the B drop. So I wanted to keep things pretty consistent, but obviously for a B drop, you want things to change. So I left the growl in the 808, nothing gets changed there, it's just the same sounds. And then I introduced a new lead here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one. So this is lead Firesaw One, which is a fantastic sounding preset for those kind of like modern festival type trap beats, or, you know, trance or whatever you might be doing. So this is the lead here. Didn't touch anything. I think all I did was just change the glide time just to make it fit a bit more with the lead line I was doing and fit more in time with the track. So this sounds like this in the final result. So didn't really do all that much to it to process it. First, I've got a distortion. This is a pretty subtle distortion. I'm just adding, you know, a bit more saturation to make the sound a bit more aggressive. After that, I've got an EQ here. This is cutting out the low end, bringing up some of the higher end stuff, and then bringing up a little bit of this mid-range information just so it's a bit more clear in the mix, just because it's a fairly quiet and thin sound. So bringing out that mid-range just helps to make it poke out in the mix a bit better. After that here, I've got an EQ. This is just getting rid of a couple resonances to the sound that I didn't really like and just made it a bit too loud in the mix. So this is just kind of taming the sound overall, nothing too crazy. And then I just did the old metallic delay trick once more just to bring out that metallic texture, which really changes the way the sound hits. So if we listen to it without that metallic delay, it's cool, but it doesn't, you know, really stand out, and it sounds just a bit flat and gets a bit buried in the mix. So this delay just brings it a bit more to life and gives it just a bit more depth and sonic space. Next up, we've got this guy right here. This is the power brass sound, which is probably one of my favorite brass sounds in all of SynthMaster's library. So this one didn't really do all that much to. I don't think I actually changed anything, but it's a really, really great big brass sound, which I need for, you know, those big trap style brass hits. So without any processing on it, it sounds like this, which is a really great and fairly realistic brass sound, but it's not quite there yet. So there's actually a couple quick tricks you can employ to make synth brass sound a lot more realistic and alive. So first up, I added this distortion here. This is not too aggressive. It's just a bit of drive to make it a bit more aggressive and give it that kind of like someone was recording a big brass section and they played really, really loud. So distortion can really make brass jump out. You'll see the difference this makes here. So now it instantly just comes right out at you. So now it's just sounding a bit dry, and we need to give it that space. So I added a reverb here, and I just created a pretty large reverb, about 5 seconds, and mixed it in about halfway. So this gives it that acoustic space to sit in. So it's almost like a bunch of horn players in a theater, or like a, I don't know, like a gymnasium or something like that. And that right there really makes this jump out. But obviously this sound is getting really, really big and a bit out of control. So I reined it in with a little bit of EQ here, just cutting out all that low end stuff to make sure we have room for the kick and 808 and the growl bass. And then bringing up a bit of high mid information around 6K, just for some presence and air to the overall sound. After that, just a little bit of stereo enhancement here. This is just to make it wider and get it a little bit out of the way of everything else, especially that like metallic saw lead patch we've got going. So the final horns sound like this, which is just that classic big festival trap brass sound, which I think sounds really, really nice. So once I had my drops done, it was just a matter of filling out the intro and then the build up and then the mid section just to give it a bit of space. So let's go ahead and pick those apart now. So the intro is actually pretty simple. It's just these two synth patches here. So first up, I wanted just a pad sound just to set the chords and, general flow of the song. And then I wanted a little arp sound just to kind of sprinkle in and build up and add some tension to the whole thing. So the pad sound is this guy right here. So this is the Gorgeous Violins, Turonish. Not totally sure how to pronounce that. So this is just a classic synth string sound, really nice, warm, but pretty mellow sound. And it's not too huge, which is important. We don't want to take up all the space right away. So this sound is this guy right here. So I didn't do all that much to process this sound. It was pretty much ready to go. All I did was just add a little bit of reverb, a pretty big reverb and pretty wet, just to give it some space and just kind of push it a little bit further back in the overall mix. And then just some EQ, really basic EQ, cutting out just low end and a bit of low mid mud stuff I didn't really want. So then I've got the arp here, which I think is really the kind of standout point of the intro and buildup of this track. So the arp is based off this preset called Crumble Keys. So it's a really nice key sound, and I just wanted to arpeggiate it. So I went to the arpeggiator here, set it to eighth notes, and then just adjusted the gate a little bit just to get the flow of it right and make it sure it sounds all right. Didn't touch anything else that I remember. So that left me with a pretty solid starting point. It's got all the effects and everything ready to go, so I really didn't need to process it at all. And that sounds like this. So I think that was pretty much perfect, but I needed it just to evolve a little bit over time. So I grabbed Shaper Box here and I used the Time Shaper. And what I'm doing here is a band split time effect. So this is pitching it down while this one pitches it up. So that changes the timing of everything. The lower part plays back at half speed and the upper part doubles the speed. So what I did is mix this in over time here, which is what this automation clip is. So by the time we get around to the end of this big intro / buildup, it starts to get faster and a bit more complex. So that really easily allowed me to set up just kind of the main theme and build that tension, get everything going. So from there, I needed to craft the buildup. So for the buildup here, you can see it's mostly just a bunch of different drum layers and different things happening at different times. But I wanted to create that kind of big riser swell to really drive up that tension before we just drop to silence and then the big growl bass and the drop kicks in. So that's what this layer is right here. So this is actually a pretty straightforward patch, and you can make risers like this yourself really easily in SynthMaster. So I created a new preset and I just set up a saw wave, 16 voices of unison, and I set the detune and width down and the volume all the way down, and then I set the sub to white noise and drop the volume down as well. And that's really it. So this is all based around actually the LFO, because we can use the LFO in the ramp mode to create a tempo synced riser. So if we go into my mod matrix, you'll see LFO1 is tied to a handful of things. It's going to the pitch, so it's going to pitch up over time. The sub volume, so that noise is going to start swelling in, even though it's going to start from 0. The oscillator 1 volume, so the oscillator is not only pitching up in time, it's also just getting louder and louder and louder, which helps build that tension. Below that, I've got the detune spread, so this is going to get more and more detuned and unstable over time. And then the panning spread right here, so this is going to make it more and more wide over time in the stereo field, which creates a really, really nice and easy riser. So from here, you could just layer it up with other noises or add effects or whatever you want to do. So this sound ended up sounding like this. Which I think was perfect. So what I did, just to make it a bit wider, was add just some Foley noises. So this is a sander, and then some inharmonic noise I generated. And when I put all three of those together, got this really big, tense riser that built up really well into the drop. Outside of that, there's not really a whole lot going on, just some impact effects that I made, some Foley sounds and other drum sounds for the build-up here. That's pretty much all that's going on there. In terms of the drums, we can take a look at those really quick. So I've got these toms here, and I just reversed a tom hit and then created some different tom fills for different sections of the track. And another one here. One more right here. And then one final one here at the very end. So that just creates, you know, a little bit of break and overall release to some of the heavier sections. The drums here, there's a kick which is made up of two different layers. This kick is a kick I made, and then a hi-hat sample I made. This just adds that nice ticky brightness. Couple layers to the snare here, and just some big reverb on it. So the snare sounds like this. This is just made with some Foley, and I actually clanged some pots and pans in my kitchen. That just gets that nice, you know, modern metallic doof snare type of sound. Other than that, nothing too special, just a couple hi-hat rolls and things like that. So everything was ready to go, and then I just needed to do the midsection again. So I just kind of recycled the riser idea and just changed it around slightly. So I used the same riser, so it's the same layers, nothing else changes, and I just changed the rhythmic pattern to the riser. So that goes like this. We get that nice kind of swelling tension coming in. And it cuts out for a big tom fill here. But those brass hits in that fill section here just really made it stand out, because, you know, the brass is such this big aggressive sound that it really starts setting the pace, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. We drop out, and then the brass kicks in again and just makes it sound so huge. And that's pretty much it for this track. SynthMaster is awesome for making these really modern styles of music, and the phase distortion modes especially can really let you create something that's completely different than something you can do in other synths. And that's it for this video, so thanks for watching, and to get SynthMaster One for yourself or find more information, you can go to kv331audio.com.